to another episode of Loki Sucks Dick. I am one of your co-hosts, Seth. I'm joined by Aaron.
Hello.
Today, we are talking about the fourth episode of Loki called the Nexus Event. If you haven't seen our previous episodes, you don't have to watch this one, as long as you've seen the episode of Loki, but we do encourage you to go back and watch those episodes. And while you're there, maybe like, subscribe, leave us a comment, some nice like that. In last week's episode, in our filmmaking segment, we talked about oneers and long takes, as well as bisexual lighting.
Yes.
And our queer theme, among others, was adaptability and survival.
You can check out that episode on this channel or the extended episode on our Patreon, where we also have access to all of our additional film podcasts. Check out all of that and so much more at patreon.com/Manchester
Well, Aaron.
Yes?
What did you think of episode 4 of Loki?
Oh my gosh. It's going to be really hard to keep this episode down to an hour. That's for certain, because I had so many thoughts about this episode of Loki. I think the biggest one is it would be so on brand for me to fall in love with the other version of myself, regardless of gender. And I know that there's some people that are complaining about that and saying that either it's like too predictable or like it's too narcissistic or whatever. But I think when you have a life that is particularly unusual and you've been through a lot of really traumatic events, it can be hard to relate to other people that haven't gone through similar things. And Loki is the god of mischief. There's really not anybody who's lived a similar life. And it stands to reason that the first person that he can develop a real honest connection with is his female form,
I think the show's been doing really well at kind of running the footwork to set up the idea that Loki hasn't done this whole fall in love thing before, regardless of, gender or what have you. It really seems like, especially based on the last two conversations that we've heard about his, feelings on romance and love. This is like all new territory for him.
Yeah.
So probably the most comfortable person to fall in love with would be himself.
Exactly. And the whole love is a dagger metaphor, realistically, love is something that has been used as a weapon against him, or that he has used as a weapon that has been turned against him. Like, there's a very specific reason that the dagger is associated with Loki and his metaphor, the ability for it to be quickly turned around on the person who is using it. And, I think it's really intriguing because, a lot of people can relate to that. It's a really relatable, especially some of the characters in this are absolutely have a lot of narcissistic traits. And if you've been in relationships primarily with narcissists, or you are the narcissist in a relationship, your ideas of relationships are just completely skewed, and you really can't develop a strong emotional connection to somebody. It precludes your ability to love. So if you were an abuser or a manipulator or a narcissist, whatever you want to call it, and or if you're in a relationship with people who are like that, you're never going to have a real connection. You're always going to feel alone, even when you're with somebody else. And a lot of people can relate to that. And this episode was particularly challenging for me for that reason, where, a lot of my relationships were founded on false pretenses. And I don't really feel like I've ever been in a relationship that was genuine and not on false pretenses, partly because I wasn't out. I didn't know who I was, gender sexuality wise. And that makes a difference. And partly because a lot of the relationships that I was in were founded under false pretenses.
Yeah, personal experience can always repaint these kind of things with, I think, a lot more nuance than maybe someone's offhand take. I know it was being discussed in our Discord, which is open for you to join. It's an open Discord. We were talking about this in our channel on Loki about, it was hitting some people as being maybe a little goofy, and I can totally see that as being the read. I think the only reason I disagree is because the goofiness within this series is baked into the science fiction and presentation, but it's never been built into any of the relationships that we've seen. All of the relationships have been sincere, deceitful or not.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because having Loki fall in love with himself kind of, it comes off as predictable to me. But in the same way, it wasn't written as predictable. It didn't feel predictable when it happened. And the way that it happened, it felt very, I don't know, it felt real to me. It didn't feel like something that was put together just for contrivance or plot's sake or something like that. There was actually genuine character chemistry, and it makes sense for the two of those characters. Like, I will admit, and this is something that we're going to discuss in the queer theme section. I will admit that enemies to lovers is one of my favorite character relationship dynamics right now. So I was already primed to enjoy this, and I think the queer community in particular really enjoys that dynamic. So
totally
worked well for me.
I think that, or I guess I wonder. The Nexus event that was popping up while they were, kind of holding hands and coming to that realization. Yeah. I wonder if they're setting up a twist there of them starting to think it's, the power of love, air quotes. When it's not. But then, but it's not, and there's something else going on in there. I'm just curious about that, because I won't be mad if it's not, but I could totally see Trojan horsing a little twist in with that part.
Yeah. I really love how, Kate Herron stressed that one of the things that she had pitched initially with the show was that, it was going to have a love story. And I really enjoy that from the beginning, this was set up like a love story. And I believe that's one of the reasons that it works.
Oh yeah, her direction and her inspirations have been incredible. I mean, Brazil, you've got Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Blade Runner. This episode was just screaming Blade Runner. Yeah. And then we were even reading the Teletubbies somehow made it as an inspiration. I'm pretty sure location is what they were going for there. But I mean, honestly, that could mean anything. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. We will find out sooner rather than later, probably.
Absolutely.
So I want to bring your attention. There's two things that I think are either, I'm not sure if they are red herrings or if they are actual important plot points. And audience, this question is open to you as well. Please let us know in the comments below if you what your thoughts about it are. Mobius signs a document in this, and it's shown on screen for a particularly long period of time, which makes me think that it may actually be something of interest. The other thing I'm curious about is the Nexus event that Lady Loki is supposedly involved in, because it's, first of all, Renslayer's I don't remember. That is a cold-hearted bitch moment, because she remembers, because that's the one that got away. It's going to be the one that she has a vendetta against. That's going to be important to her forever. But also, I'm curious, is it something that's actually important, or is it something that's just random one-off, nothing, red herring thing?
Yeah, see, I'll see you on the second one. Yeah. Ravona, because after have we done spoiler alerts for this yet?
I mean, I feel like this show is just a spoiler.
Yeah, I mean, the assumption is if you saw Loki episode 4, that's the only reason you're watching this. Yeah. So, so my thought is, after the Timekeepers are exposed to be androids, Ravona still uses the stick on Loki, which means she either already knew and wasn't that surprised, or B, has something so much more important going on that it didn't matter, which I could totally see lining up with the Nexus event that you're mentioning.
Yeah, exactly. So we've never seen her actually talk to the Timekeepers, right?
Correct. We got a quick shot of her walking into the chamber at the beginning of this episode, but no, this was their first interaction on screen at all.
So we don't really have any reason to believe that it's not her that is the one behind the androids.
Yeah, nothing pointing away from that at this point, or that she's at least in league with the person who would be, and that might be a good swap-a-roo into a question for the audience: is who do you think's behind all this? Is it Ravona? Could it be Kang? I know that's been one I've seen bounced around a lot. That this is kind of Wizard of Oz stuff, and he's doing a whole puppet show to keep the TVA around.
Well, and the whole reason Ravona existed in the first place in the comic books, and I correct me if I'm wrong in the comments because it's been a while since I've read the books, but she basically was around to Kang was kind of like an incel for a while, and he was like, baby, love me, and for a while she didn't. It was not great. Didn't eventually she gave in though, and they have another one of those kind of gross love things.
Yeah. I mean, Kang in and of himself is kind of strung throughout all of the Marvel comics at this point. So I'm curious. I think the reason that I don't disbelieve it being Kang is because the TVA technology strikes me as that kind of futuristic technology that Kang uses in the comics. Just because it's not magic-based specifically, it kind of seems like it's based in science, but it's doing some other wibbly-wobbly stuff. I don't know. I don't care at this point. If it's anybody pulling the strings back there, I'm just going to be happy because this is the kind of story that I'm really enjoying seeing play out, regardless of theory craft or anything like that.
I love that there are any number of people that it could plausibly be. And because there are so many shows that you're okay, well, there's one or two that it makes sense, that it could be plausible. They have the technology and they have the money and they have the access. A lot of times you don't have a lot of viable suspects, but in the MCU, you've got so many powerful characters that any number of individuals, solo or group, could be behind this. And I think it would actually be interesting if everybody thinks that it's Kang, and in reality it's Kang plus who was it? Was it Nightmare that everybody was saying might be hinted at?
Yeah. I think that the Nightmare thing is one of the downsides to having generically named villains is that if their name's just going to come up as a word in conversation, that everyone's going to be like, oh, that's a thing. I'm not sure if I believe in Nightmare being in this or not yet.
Yeah.
For sure, Doctor Strange. That's I would bet money on that. I'm not sure here, but a conglomerate of villains, that would be super fun. That feels like a lot of opportunity going forward.
Yeah. As much as I do worry about a character like Doctor Strange, overshadowing Loki on his own show or something like that, Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston, their interactions are primo, and this really is a great opportunity to just lavish some attention on that. So I would not be mad if you were right. That's what I'll say there.
Sure. Something I wanted to bring up was the I mentioned it a minute ago, the Blade Runner of all of this.
Yes.
Specifically this episode, you had mentioned, because you got to watch the episode before me, you had mentioned that there's a lot of noir elements going into it. And so that was the lens that I watched it through. But then seeing some of the shots that I'll bring up later in the filmmaking section, a lot of the moody lighting, the kinds of conversations, and then it starts to get more specific when you have Mobius kind of digging to figure out this secret within the TVA, has a very, Deckard Shaw feel to it. That was the name of the guy from Blade Runner, right? Deckard Shaw?
Wait, Shaw doesn't sound right. Is it Deckard? Wait, am I confusing with Deckard Cain from Diablo?
Something Deckard.
Deckard and Cain. I don't remember.
Whatever. And then we get the reveals that for instance, he figures out that he's a variant instead of the fact that he's, created by the TVA. And then we get the reveal that the TVA timekeepers are androids. And that's literally the plot of Blade Runner.
I think one of the reasons that it works so well, and also one of the reasons that it does feel so much like a movie, is because you ordinarily with TV shows, you've got 8, 13, 26 episodes, and it would have taken a long time before those reveals. But like this, it all hit in the same episode. So it kind of felt like Blade Runner, just condensed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you've ever if you've never watched Blade Runner and really like this episode, I would say go check it out. But if you're not a fan of Blade Runner and you've already seen it, this might be the best version of Blade Runner that you could watch.
True. Hiddles. I will watch Hiddles in anything.
I'd watch Hiddles in a Blade Runner movie, not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
I did have a couple issues. Minor issues.
Yeah.
And I realized as I was thinking about it that it's a problem I'm glad I didn't have.
Okay.
So last episode ends with the explosion of the ship on Lamentous, right?
Yeah.
And the final shot is just like, Loki defeated, which is a theme through the show. And then this episode opens with Loki and Sylvie having their moment that turns into a Nexus event.
Yeah.
Now, if it were me, I would have had the Nexus event be the end of episode 3.
Yeah.
I get why they ended it where they did. That is like a huge emotional, crescendo to end on after that big long oneer that we talked about. But then pacing wise, I feel like the like question of what is this Nexus event being the setup for the next episode may have paid off a little bit better.
Yeah. Or you know what? Do that as a mid-credit scene.
Yeah, exactly. And then, the mid-credit scene was my other semi-issue with this.
Yeah.
Let me briefly explain. So, big spoiler, Mobius gets, it hurt to watch Mobius getting taken out like that. And that really, struck me for a while. I was like, this is insane. I can't believe they're doing this in the 4th episode. And then the episode ends with the same thing happening to Loki. And I was like, is this the big switcheroo? Are we about to follow Sylvie for the second half of this series?
And for the rest of the MCU, because...
And that's our new Loki. Yeah. I was like, this might be the ballsiest shit I've ever seen in my life. But then that post-credit scene, man, shows up, and I was like, oh, no, it's not the end that we thought it was. So I felt like it just kind of kneecapped those 2 moments for me.
Yeah.
And it could have been a great opening shot for the next episode is all I'm going to say. And I might be wrong, but I feel like that is going to be the opening shot of the next episode.
It's interesting because... I think it would have been interesting for the speculation cycle to just have you not know.
Exactly.
So I'm really curious why, because everything that has been done with this just seems so very well planned. Like the writing, the cinematography, the direction, it is all very well planned. All female writing team, gotta give them a big hands up. And it seems really silly that they would have done that for no reason. And, wasted... they know what Marvel is like. They know the speculation cycle and how that contributes to a show. Yeah, the only reason it makes sense for them to do that is if they have something planned that would just be diminished by a full week cycle of, is Loki dead or is Loki not? Are we switching Lokis? That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I trust them completely. I haven't really been let down, and I part of this is just my film rescue brain never turning off. I'm always looking for minor improvements to things. So that's all it is. I'm not even mad about this. This isn't occupying my brain in any negative space. I was just like, man, I would have shifted both of these episodes backwards about 2 minutes into the previous episodes, and it'd be perfect. But that's just me.
Yeah, exactly. I think in general, though, I've been really happy with... They haven't gone a lot of the places that I've feared. They haven't gone a lot of the places that I've expected. But the places that they have gone that I've expected have really paid off.
Oh, totally. And sometimes the comfort of knowing what is happening in the moment is necessary. You don't want to be offbeat or on the tips of your toes at all times. Well, Aaron, what are some other thoughts you had on this episode?
I thought it was really interesting how Renslayer's character was written, because she is like classic abuser, manipulative kind of behavior. I really loved how, first of all, there's this whole, let me get the quote. It's, friends against time, allies to the end. This whole, you need to be loyal to me even if I'm not giving you all of the information. And as soon as anybody starts questioning her, she either gets rid of them or, which, not necessarily the best. When people ask her questions, she turns it back on them. She kind of does the whole, I'm trying to protect you. How could you be suspicious of me when, why are you asking all of these questions of me when I'm doing all of these things to protect you? And I just, it was really great writing. Bisha Ali has been doing some just phenomenal writing, just in terms of writing characters that are very flawed in kind of narcissistic, neurodivergent, and even in Renslayer's case, kind of super manipulative, controlling. It's funny that she's the one who's trying to make the Lokis out like they're bad, and she's worse than all of them.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't think of that until you brought it up just now. When you were mentioning that Ravona might be the one behind everything, I was like, yeah, I could see a bigger villain there. But now that you're mentioning it, there's some shady shit going on there.
Yeah, I really, just to let y'all know, you should definitely subscribe, because we're going to be doing an episode 7 where we kind of rewatch the entire series and we track all of the different queer themes and see kind of how they have developed and other things like that. And that's something that I really want to go back and look. I've always had feelings about her. I always knew that there was something off about her, but I thought it was kind of just she used to be really bad and she had a redemption arc. And I'm like, oh wait, did she have a redemption arc though?
Ooh, maybe because she's a variant, the life that she left was worse than the one that she got at the TVA, and that's why she's so gung-ho about keeping it around.
Yeah, or one of the theories that I had is it would be interesting if she was a Loki or something like that and kind of had the there can be only one attitude, or maybe she's just a variant and has the there can be only one attitude.
Yeah.
Something I was thinking about when you were talking about Mobius is we know that Loki, there was an interesting quote early on. Let me see if I can find it in my notes. About Loki's. We may lose, sometimes painfully, but we don't die, we survive. But did Mobius? Are Lokis the only ones that can survive pruning?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to say gut feeling is no. I think Mobius is still alive. That's just my
the wrong
gut
decision to kill off him.
Yeah, I mean, beyond pruning that ship, I think that I think showing that Loki survived the pruning seems to tell me that there might be a place outside of the sacred timeline where these characters go.
Yes, I really loved that he had kind of pointed out that maybe he had some sort of thing with jet skis in real life, because that was something that we predicted last week.
Yeah, ahead of new rock stars, by the way.
Yes. Well, I've been predicting that Sif was going to be on this show ever since a mutual friend of ours said that a friend of hers that's a stand-in was cast as a yet unannounced stand-in. And we saw pictures of her and I'm like, oh, this is totally Sif.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So yeah. I'm glad that paid out.
I think that overall, I love what that scene did for Loki's character, but I think that was probably my least favorite looking of all the scenes. Just you could tell it was kind of like a flat stage, which if shot in the right way can be really good looking. But yeah, that was my only issue with that scene. It was oh, okay, one Pac-Man room where she just walks through on a loop. Got it.
Loved that. And then one of the other things I found super interesting was an interaction between Loki and Mobius. Loki says, of all the liars in the place, you're the biggest. Mobius replies, because I lied about your girlfriend, referencing him saying that Lady Loki had died, or Sylvie had died. And he said, no, I mean the lies you tell yourself. And I think that is really interesting, because it shows what the most valuable thing to Loki is, and that is just authenticity to oneself. And it's why it's so fascinating to see him wrestle with being in love with Sylvie, because there are a lot of characters that it would have felt contrived. Like, why did he bother? Like, why did he, like, try? Like, why? Kind of like, why did he open his heart to her after all of these years? But it really, that whole thing with him needing to be authentic and such, it really it says a lot about his character, and that's another one of those things that I'm going to be tracking to see throughout the whole show, to see how much that tracks. I think that's all of, like, my general episode feedback. What about you? Anything else before we go into filmmaking?
I only have one question, and I already know the answer, and it pains me. Was there enough Casey in this episode?
Look, Casey better be, like, the big, important, like, episode 5 and 6 are just devoted to him as a character, and we're okay with that.
Yeah, honestly, I would very much be happy with that. I really, really thought that this was going to be a running thing, and hopefully I get my redemption by the end of the series, but god damn it, there's just not been enough Casey. In today's filmmaking segment, I would just really appreciate it if I could gush for a little bit.
Yes.
We were treated to a real snack of an episode as far as cinematography goes. Yeah. And so I'm going to go into kind of the broader aspects of cinematography, but specifically, I want to highlight my favorite 10 shots and moments from this episode, because it was just a smorgasbord of beautiful cinematography.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna list these in timestamp order. So if you decide to watch this episode back to look for these on your own, you're welcome to. I'm also going to be throwing them up on the screen as I bring them up. Starting with number 1, at the 2-minute mark, we have the flyover over Asgard, which is the shot that goes from a real helicopter shot over, I think, the same island location from The Last Jedi. They swing up over that kind of jagged green rock ridge, and you see Asgard in the valley down below with the Bifrost sticking out up to the right. CGI is a powerful tool now, and that landscape doesn't exist in the real world, and the fact that they made it look so beautiful, I'm just... impressed the socks off me to turn CGI into great cinematography. That's just bravo. Absolutely bravo. The second one, and this one fucked with me. At the 3-minute and 33-second mark is our first reveal of the 3 timekeepers.
Yeah. That
was on purpose. I don't care what anybody says anymore. These 3s are happening on purpose, and I love it.
Absolutely, like the parallels between the Holy Trinity and everything like that. I saw somebody on TikTok that was like, why is nobody talking about all of the religious themes? And I'm like, we did week 1.
We are, I promise.
It's not our fault. The algorithm hates us.
Shot number 3 that I loved. It's a wide of Loki and Sylvie sitting together at 9 minutes and 38 seconds. There's a few wides that are really great in the scenes while they're still on that planet that's dying. Lamentous. However, this one just stood out as just really, really well framed and well shot. The colors and lighting is great. It's them looking back at us, through the camera. It's just really, really well constructed. I'll point out some of the lines in it that I really enjoy. Next, we have at number 4, Ravona in a classic Blade Runner Noir shot sitting behind her desk with the blinds and even a little bit of lens flare popping through to give us just a really smoky room. I loved that shot.
Yeah. And I really love how they've went with the film noir aesthetic so hard in this episode because, like, classically that whole aesthetic is to indicate the fact that, you know, characters have, like, both lightness and darkness and everything like that. And it was just such a great visual thing. And you really start to see it hit hard when you see her at her desk. And you know, the blinds, any good film noir has that good blind scene. So I love that.
Absolutely. Well, and this entire episode has switched the lighting procedure that they've been using. So it's been very flat office lighting in many of the episodes leading up to this point. In this episode, and I'll throw up some examples, they switched to backlighting. So all of the characters' foreground is dark and shadowed, and then they have a halo of light around them. Yeah. Especially in dialogue scenes, it comes out the most there of this just like moody backlighting, which is just so good to look at.
And those extreme close-ups on some of the dialogue scenes, especially towards the end, that's another hallmark of film noir cinematography.
Actually, that was the very next shot that I was going to talk about at 21 minutes and 26 seconds, where Owen Wilson says, "You incredible seismic narcissist." What a great moment.
That's so good.
Perfectly well written, perfect delivery, and there's a gorgeous close-up shot of Owen Wilson in that one. Moving on, 29 minutes and 22 seconds, we have a second medium shot of Ravona in her office after her conversation with Mobius, where he was kind of questioning her a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of the actor exemplifying their character's mood through body language.
Yeah.
There's not a lot happening overall. It's a pretty standard shot setup, but the emoting that is coming off of Ravona is just excellent for her character.
So good. So good.
At 30 minutes and 26 seconds, we get a kind of an extended push in and close-up shot of Hunter B-15 as she's experiencing her real memories with Sylvie. That's acting. That's what acting looks like. to like just visually vocalize with her face what she was experiencing, and you knew when she finished the memory and said, "I looked happy," or "I was happy," or something like that. It's like, oh my god, that is heartbreaking.
That was so tragic. And like when you see the footage of what is her Hunter C-20,
The next one I have is number 8 at 31 minutes and 13 seconds. We get one of my favorite shots of the episode. It's a slow push in on Mobius as he's looking at the temp pad for the information about what happened to Hunter B-20 since he's kind of uncovering this mystery. But what's really cool about this shot is that the bookshelves on either side are completely dark and not lit at all. So it frames up the shot of Mobius in like a 1-1 Instagram square. Yeah. So it funnels everything into the middle of the shot. And I just love the way that looked for calling attention to what he was figuring out. You saw, it was almost like a visual metaphor for his tunnel vision as he was linked into this idea that maybe the TVA isn't what it seems. At number 9, this is just a quick moment. It's at 35 minutes and 47 seconds. Sylvie raises her eyebrows at Ravona without a single word in the entire scene. And again, that's acting. That is like what a glorious little moment. I love that for her character. And the last one, and it I think goes without saying, at 45 minutes and 9 seconds, holy shit, more Lokis.
Yes! That was so good, especially a fucking alligator Loki.
Alligator Loki, it's shot from the ground up in Loki's perspective on the ground. I don't know where these costumes came from, but they are just
on point.
So wonderful. Just every single costume feels like it comes out of its own unique MCU timeline.
it's just the attention to detail on everything in this show has just been one of the things that like most consistently appeals to me.
Yeah, just I appreciate you letting me geek out for a moment on these beautiful shots. Just because I had just such a good time looking at this episode. I could mute this episode and love watching it. It's like that for me.
Yeah, and that brings me into another interesting discussion about filmmaking in that there's a lot of interesting visual metaphors we've kind of been picking up through along the way, and those help tell the story as well. And I think one of the biggest, and go back into costumes as well, one of the biggest changes from last week is that towards the end of last episode, Loki loses his TVA variant jacket, and Sylvie loses her horns, and you kind of see like those important like last vestiges of these like identities that were thrust upon them by other people, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of being stripped away, and I just love the way they put so much energy and attention into these visual metaphors.
Yeah, absolutely. It works perfectly, especially as we've seen these characters get stripped down over the last 2 episodes.
Yeah.
In an emotional sense. We're also seeing it in a visual sense, and we haven't even seen their final form. Like, what does the boss mode version of Loki and Sylvie's like? The like back-to-back cover on a VHS or something. Like, what does that shot look like for them, and what do those costumes look like? Do you think because they're both Loki variants, do they like organize their costumes together?
Oh my god, that's so. I want that. That's the existence I want.
That would be so Loki to be like, oh, you're wearing that armor? Because I was going to wear this, so maybe you should change.
Oh, the things that they would argue about. I would honestly like to see their WandaVision sitcom. I would watch that.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, that would be so much fun.
Mm-hmm. So, Seth, would you say that this is the best big bisexual cast since the original Mummy film?
100% yes. I mean, even the dorky characters are still kind of thick and hot. I mean,
seriously.
Casey looks like he works out, is all I'm saying.
Oh, yes. There's this guy, I think his name is Brutal Dan, who I follow on Twitter. And yes, I could see the two of them having very similar just personalities, and like in when he was a real human.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Overall, we should actually come up with a list sometime of like other shows and movies that have that big bisexual, like I would bang the whole cast energy.
Exactly. Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of queer themes in this episode. I want to touch on like a couple of tiny ones really quick before we get into the big one. Queer children being sent away with some like intent upon reforming them. That has big conversion training energy.
Yeah. There's so much we don't know about that character, and just I think they kept it low key enough that anyone who's gone through anything similar to that will be able to latch onto it as like an entry point of like, oh no, I remember being therapized as a child for having the wrong ideas about things.
Yeah. Shit, oh man. And there's a scene. God, who was it that said it? Somebody. It's either Mobius or Renslayer says, he wouldn't want anybody to panic. And I'm just like, gay panic, all of the fear mongering and stuff like that. There's definitely some kind of like underlying themes there too.
Right. Yeah. Don't you dare threaten the nuclear 1950s thing that we've set up here with your gayness.
One thing that I'm really glad that they haven't done thus far is, that I thought they did for a hot second, was this whole thing about like when you've got a queer character and then they like realize that they're in love for the first time. A lot of times that's the point at which writers kill them off, or TV shows kill them off. And it looked like they were going that direction for a second.
Yes, it did.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? But I mean, they still, I guess, could go that sort of a direction. We have not seen any sort of happily ever after. And I honestly wonder, like, there is such a big theme of queer characters not getting a happily ever after, or only getting a very truncated one because, one or both of them dies a couple of years later or something like that.
Right.
When I was a younger writer, I always wrote things like I never wrote happy love stories because in my mind as a queer person there was no real like relationship scenario in which there was a happy end,
Yeah.
I think happy endings were for us.
Mm.
So that's an interesting. That obviously is going to be the thing that I'm paying the most attention to going into episode 6. Yeah. Assuming that they don't do a cliffhanger, since they've already said that there's going to be a second season.
Yeah. Who knows where they end up? I guess I could totally see an ending where things, do come out on top for both of them.
Yeah.
The way the conversations between characters have gone thus far, I get the feeling that there's going to be a disalignment of Sylvie and Loki by the end of the series that sends them both on their own paths. And that could also be happy. I mean, maybe it took Loki meeting a Loki to realize Loki could love.
Yeah, and I mean they could do something like Scott Pilgrim, where they realize that they have their own shit to deal with before they can consider being in a relationship. They could do like a Zero Effect, where they recognize that a relationship does not need to be permanent, or like marriage and family and kids to have value. Like you can, just because you love somebody doesn't mean that you need to be with them to the end of time. Like you can just love them for a short period of time and have it not amount to anything. My inclination, since this is kind of like going to be a multi-season thing, especially because, Sylvie has been so popular, is that they might do kind of a, there's a lot of barriers in between them being together and they kind of have like the tension for a while. I would not be mad at a bunch of big sexual tension.
Yeah, the ongoing sexual tension can really sell stuff too. You know what I mean? I don't want it to write them into a corner where they feel like they have to answer the question of do they end up together or not.
Exactly. Especially considering you don't know what the future of the characters is in the MCU films as well. One of the things, like I know it's true to the character and everything like that, but one of the dumbest decisions that I think they did with Tony Stark was just pepper pots and hooking them up so early. Like, I feel like having him just be a free agent, even if it's not the most true to the books thing, makes a lot of sense. And I really don't like how they kind of handled the whole situation after Gwyneth Paltrow kind of realized she was done with the franchise. I think realistically, they should have realized that Gwyneth Paltrow was not working out as a character and recast her or something like that, or gotten rid of Pepper as like the girlfriend character sooner, because I do like seeing my characters, especially my characters who go from being villains to being heroes, to have like a good period of time where they're stable by themselves. And like I would love if that's the consensus that they come to, is like, hey, we love each other, we will always love each other, and we don't need to be together for that. So for now, at least, we're gonna just let one another grow and we'll reevaluate later and see how this goes.
Well, and they have a lot going for them for that, right? So they're both Asgardians, so they live a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
They also, at this point, have access to TVA technology that would allow them to meet up later on at any point in time. They could age, a certain amount and grow a certain amount, and then meet back up at the beginning and say, all right, let's give it a run through this way now that we've figured our shit out.
That's kind of romantic, though.
I'm thinking very specifically of Futurama and how the last episode turns into a loop of literally like, okay, if you enjoyed the show, just go back to episode 1 because that's how this episode's ending at the end. but now they know, and you've learned all the lessons along the way. So maybe that's a more meta version of what I'm talking about here. But wouldn't that, as final words to each other in this series, being like, "Hey, I'll see you back at the beginning of time," or something like that. Very romantic. That could totally work.
Or like an Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, meet me in Montauk type thing, like meet me in Lamentous or something like that. Something that is like their apocalypse. Oh my god, that is so romantic. I totally fuck with that. Like, why are people upset about them being in a romance? There are so many. Like, yeah, there is a little bit of a tiny little bit of a creepy aspect to it, but like, we're gonna assume that like genetically they're either not related or they're not procreating.
See, I don't know if I see the creepy aspect. Maybe I'm outing myself, but like if a second me showed up, I might suck his dick.
Absolutely. 150%. I would not even hesitate. I would just be like, all right, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Let's get it on.
I feel like this is one of those questions you hear in high school of like, is it gay to have sex with yourself if there's an exact version of yourself? And it's like, doesn't matter. Isn't it technically masturbating?
I'm bisexual. Doesn't matter either way.
Right. Oh, yeah. If I was presented with, like, exactly me, but the female version, I don't know. I feel like we'd both be on that same wavelength of, like, at least once for the history books, right?
Exactly. I love the idea of somebody that could actually really understand me. That just jives with me. As someone that has felt like most of my life that I've been misunderstood, that I haven't been around people that appreciated me, I really jive with the idea of just like somebody who gets me in a way that nobody else does.
Definitely. That's very very empathetic. I think for most people, the idea that you get things about yourself that no one else ever might, and in ways that you may not ever be able to even voice. You know what I mean? Just to turn the thought into a sentence sometimes breaks the magic of it existing in your head. Yeah.
So I mentioned at the beginning enemies to lovers being a really popular like relationship dynamic in media that a lot of queer people just really glom onto that. And I think I'd really be curious to know what your theories are on why that is. I have some of my own. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
From like a psychological perspective, I think a large portion of it comes through the timing of people figuring out the experience. Let me rephrase the experience for a lot of queer people over the last like 20 or 30 years, where it's been a little more accepting. We've had changes in laws and stuff, but like figuring out your sexuality is something that happens the strongest through puberty, and puberty's happening during like middle and high school, which is when nobody knows who they are yet. That's just how it works. And so I think what happens is you have these bad interactions with people that become, like mental enemies to you. And then as you both go through the changes in your life and you meet on the other side in your 20s and 30s, once you've cemented who you are as an adult, you can recognize like, oh, hey, I went through this growth and development to become the queer person I am. And then you can see that person that maybe you had a tiff with back in that time, they were your enemy, and now they're, very much more aligned to you and someone you could have a relationship with. So I think it's kind of a mix of like personal timing and your relationship with your, social groups as they grow across those formative years. I think that's probably like the realism version of it, and then to see it represented over 90 minutes in a movie, you don't realize you're filling in those blocks mentally that way. That would be my like, off the cuff take. I'm not saying this is 100% correct, but that's I know for myself personally, a lot of people that I thought I would be friends with forever turned out to be just absolute jackasses. And a lot of people that I didn't like initially are some of my very dearest friends now. People that I look to for advice and respect and enjoy spending time with. A lot of those just kind of crisscross across because a lot of my social group I met when I was 15 or 16, and now that I'm 30,
big difference.
Huge difference for sure.
Yeah. I think one of my theories about this is that, like, you're kind of used to, as a queer person, especially if you didn't grow up with a big queer community around you, you're kind of used to being, like, ostracized and, like, having everybody be the enemy. And, like, the idea that people can come over to your side, like, even your enemy can come around to love you. I think there's something about that that's really compelling. I also think that there is always that element of, you know, as a queer person, the chances that somebody of, particularly, especially of the same gender, is going to be attracted to you is less than if you're, you know, a heterosexual person. Just statistics. The statistics make it, unfortunately, less likely that they are going to be gay than straight.
Sure.
And so I think that there's always some kind of, you know, not like they are going to change their mind about their sexuality, but more of they're going to realize that they were only hetero over, you know, they were compulsory heteros. They just did it because that's what they thought they had to do. And I think there's some of that element of it too, just that kind of like, you know, maybe this person who I thought was straight actually isn't straight. They just haven't realized it yet.
Or even people that are thinking about their sexuality but don't know how to voice that at the time, coming off as, you know, hetero, just because they didn't know how to voice otherwise. There's a great show on Netflix called Sex Ed, and there's two characters in it with, I don't want to get into any spoilers, but essentially they start off as very malaligned to each other, and it turns out that one of these characters was just figuring out his sexuality and had never been encouraged to voice his feelings within his household, and so he was not sure how to voice that to this other guy that he liked, and so they turn into a relationship later on, literally, you know, enemies to lovers, like you're talking about. It's a really great young people representation of that in that show that I like.
You know, it's actually funny that you say that. I was just Googling a second ago. Abisha Ali, one of the places that she got her start as a writer was sex education.
Yep, it's almost like these stars are aligning or something.
It's almost like they feel similar for a reason.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think our big gay theme this week, though, is redefining love. You know, we episode 1, we discussed, you know, when religion is used against you to oppress you, to ostracize you and control you, like how you have to, you know, have that relationship with religion and how you have to address that and such. I think love is kind of the same way, because you have, say, for example, unsupporting parents. If you're a queer person, you may have, like, if you loved me, you wouldn't be gay. How can you make me embarrassed in front of my friends? You know, things like that. You may have relationships that, especially when you're in the closet, come with a negative power dynamic, just because, you know, there is still a stigma against a lot of types of queer relationships. So you may have people like, oh, well, you know, I'll tell people we're in a relationship. I'll tell your coworkers. I'll tell your family. There's so many ways that love is different, I think, when you're a member of the queer community, because there's so much love that is a given for so many other people that's not a given for us.
It was hard to lock down a year for this episode, so we decided to do a little hand-wavium and use what should be between 2008 and 2012 based on the time loop cell that Loki got stuck in this episode. Hypothetically, that could have happened at any time on Asgard in the last 1,000 years between Sif and Loki, but I'm just going to assume that it happened sometime around the time of the first Thor movie. So today's iconic queer figure in history is Gore Vidal, who passed away in 2012. In his writings, there are many recurrent themes: American imperialism, corporate elitism, political corruption, the death of democracy, and at the forefront, the belief that queer people are just like everyone else. Eugene Louis Vidal was born in 1925 at a U.S. cadet hospital to Army officer Eugene Luther Vidal and actress Nina S. Olds. He would go by several names in his youth due to his father's confusion over his own middle name, but in 1941 settled on Gore Vidal as he wanted a sharp, distinctive name appropriate for an aspiring author or national political leader. His childhood was unusual at the time due to his family. His grandfather was a U.S. senator, and his father was on the Commerce Department's Bureau of Air Commerce. He was also known for his athletic ability. In addition to 2 wives, Vidal Sr. was also Amelia Earhart's great love. Gore's mother was a Broadway actress, more interested in her career, politics, sex, and glamour than her kids. Nina would have 3 husbands and many lovers whom she was open about. It's no surprise, then, that Gore Vidal was a precocious, ambitious writer with uncommonly progressive attitudes on sex and sexuality, who was also deeply entrenched in American politics. These traits would shape the entire life and his career. Gore was raised in Washington, D.C. and Sidwell. His grandfather, Senator Thomas Pryor Gore, was blind, and the young Vidal would often act as his reader, Senate page, and seeing eye guide. At the age of 14, he went on his first European trip and visited Rome, which would come to be at the center of Gore's literary imagination. He would transfer schools to the Phillips Exeter Academy in New York, where he worked for the school paper. Before graduation, he would begin writing poems and novels. However, his education ceased with Pearl Harbor. He enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 17. He was also assigned the first mate of the FS-35th, a U.S. Army freight and supply ship. The ship had its berth in the Aleutian Isles at Dutch Harbor. After 3 years, Vidal would suffer hypothermia and develop rheumatoid arthritis, which necessitated his reassignment as a mess officer. During his assignment and recovery, he had been penning his first novel, Willowaw, which was released when he was 21. The novel was critically acclaimed, and Vidal decided to veer away from his family's military tradition and become a writer instead. In the 1950s, Gore found himself poor, and with his reputation in shambles, he adapted. He wrote several books in different genres under multiple aliases. He turned to writing plays and screenplays, finding the latter to be particularly easy money. Vidal grew up loving movies and used them as a literary device in several of his works to explore American culture through the lens of Hollywood. While writing novels under a pseudonym, writing for TV, and making Broadway hits, Vidal also began to write book reviews for literary journals. He quickly began writing longer essays on deeper literary and political themes. He collected his first decade's worth of pieces in the 1962 anthology Rocking the Boat. This changed his reputation, making him a provocative commentator on American life and society. While much of his work is highly regarded, many believe these letters are his most significant contribution to American literature. He would return to novel writing under his real name in 1964 with the release of Julian. Julian was a well-researched historical fiction centered on the life of Roman Emperor Julianus II. During his short reign, he attempted to forsake Christianity and return to the Roman Empire to the Old Greek and Roman faiths. The book performed well critically and financially and cemented Gore's reputation once more as a competent novelist. He would continue writing novels prolifically for the rest of his career. In 1968, he created the first novel with a main character who undergoes medical gender confirmation. While he had previously experimented with gender and sexual themes before, the sexually frank black comedy was a surprise to many readers. Mira, who desires to dominate the male gender, is a character seldom represented in modern media. The novel established Vidal as one of the most prominent progressive voices in the era in matters of gender, sexuality, and gender identity. Unfortunately, the 1970 film adaptation was panned by nearly everyone, including Gore, who hadn't been involved in its creation. In his personal life, Gore often spoke of having over 1,000 sexual encounters by the age of 25, and openly spoke of his sexual encounters, including ones with powerful and influential male members of Hollywood. In 1950, he met his partner of 53 years, Howard Austin. He attributes the long life of their relationship to the fact the two of them didn't have sex. It's easy to sustain a relationship when sex plays no part, and impossible, I have observed, when it does, Gore says. Gore would be vehemently opposed to the term homosexual and is one of the first bisexual icons in Western media and publicly fight against bisexual erasure. Jason Epstein, Vidal's editor, said he wasn't unhappy about being gay, he was unhappy about being wrongly classified or pigeonholed. I think his main interest was men, but of course he slept with women. Why wouldn't he? He slept with anything. He was horny. For him, sex was like having lunch. He was certainly quick about it too. He didn't linger. Modern readers would likely explain Gore's attitude as dysphoria or internalized homophobia. He deeply wished to avoid the stigma of being part of the queer community, to the point of embracing sentiments against less socially acceptable queer people. He often spoke of wanting to be viewed as normal. For these reasons, it's worth noting that not all of Gore's beliefs are congruent with what's politically correct in the modern queer community. Reading his work should be done with a grain of salt and the knowledge that he was early in the steps of progression. It's also worth noting, however, that he was in a position to do more to benefit the community by speaking out on the behalf of AIDS and HIV, but chose not to do so, which does impact modern perceptions of his legacy. Vidal had a prolific career and achieved tremendous things for an openly bisexual man that cannot be fully discussed in a short biography, so we highly recommend you check out the references in the pinned comments below for more information. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode of Loki Sucks Dick. If you haven't already, go ahead and please check out the other 3 episodes that we've put out. We have gone over a bunch of really cool themes and filmmaking stuff that we're going to recap entirely at the end of this series. We also recently put out just kind of a short... a little quickie dicky on the side, talking about Tom Hiddleston's recent interview where he talked about his approach to Loki's gender fluidity and sexuality. That's also available on the channel. Pretty please, with sugar on top, like and subscribe. Leave us a comment down below. We're wondering who's behind the timekeepers. If you have thoughts on that, feel free to post them down there or in our Discord, which is also Montresor Media. I do have one other question for the audience. Would you like to see more of this style of thing? We were thinking about going back over some of the other Disney Plus shows, maybe WandaVision, or if by popular request, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We'd be willing to do that between now and Hawkeye, which we're definitely going to do.
And if you like this episode, be sure always to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this around on socials. We don't have a huge following yet, so it really does help us out a ton. If you really want to help us out, you can go over to Patreon and donate just a simple $1 and get access to additional content for this show and all of our other shows. And also our Patreon exclusive show, So What Else, where we discuss current topics in media.
Also, feel free to follow both of us on our personal social medias. We'd love to talk to you directly if you're having a good time watching this show. Aaron, I just want to end on one quick question for you.
Yes?
Did Loki suck dick this episode?
Well, you see it.